I'm WTOP's Mike Murillo. We're introducing you to the candidates for the Ward 3 council seat. And joining us is Matthew Frumin. He's the Democrat candidate for the seat, again, being vacated by DC Council member Mary Cheh. And Matt, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Really a pleasure.
Well, first, I want to give you the floor to introduce yourself to our listeners and to the people watching on WTOP.com.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. So I'm Matt Frumin. I'm the Democrat running in Ward 3. I've been very active in our community for 15 years. I served on my local ANC. I served on the board of Tenleytown Main Street, supporting small businesses. I chair the board at the Lisner Home, where it's an assisted living nursing facility on Western Avenue that serves low-income DC seniors and is doing the first ever Housing Production Trust Fund project in Ward 3. I created a citywide education advocacy organization called the Coalition for DC Public Schools and Communities. And the Ward 3 education advocacy group that is very active here and has done a lot of great work was created at my dining room table. I have taken a lot of pleasure and a lot of pride in working very hard on behalf of our community. I've always thought if Mary Cheh didn't run, then I would run, because I thought if I could get onto the council, I could make an even bigger difference than the difference that I've been able to make over the last 15 years on lots of different issues. And that's what I want to do. I want to get on the council, bring my practical problem-solving, coalition-building approach to improve the quality of life for residents in Ward 3 and the city.
All right, well, let's get right into the topics that you're probably being asked a lot about now on the campaign trail. We begin with violent crime, unfortunately, in DC. We are seeing, this year from last year, a little bit of a downtrend in some of the more serious reporting, especially when it comes to homicides. But still, we're well up where we were before the pandemic and other times. So obviously, crime still a very severe issue, important issue here in the city. Talk about your plans as a member of council, if you're elected, how you would approach trying to curb crime in the nation's capital.
So when this is the biggest issue on people's minds. Lots of people are frightened, and crime is up. It's maybe down a little this year compared to last year, but it's higher than any of us should be comfortable with. When I got started on this, I teamed up with an old friend, Andy Solberg, who's a 28-year veteran of MPD, to craft a public safety plan that's up on my website. And I would encourage people to look at it at fruminforward3.com. The heart of my plan is crime is up, police are down. We need more police. We need to have more of a police presence on the street. We need to be attacking this at that level. But more importantly, or equally importantly, we really need to change the relationship that our police have with our communities so that we can get at crime and preempt it sooner. We need to encourage things like violence interruption programs and outreach into the community again, target the people who are the most likely to be involved in these things and try to get them off that path. And it's an old story, but there's a question about addressing the root causes of crime. Here, I'm not a social scientist, but the trauma of the pandemic and of the last couple of years, it seems like that is part of what is causing this increase in crime. And if you believe that social and economic conditions are a source of crime, a big thing we need to do is attack the root causes of crime so that we can give people hope and opportunity so they don't engage in it in the first place. I don't believe we will ever incarcerate our way to safety. We need to get at the root causes. We need to work on the relationship of the police and the community. But we also, in the immediate term, we need to add to our police force in order to make sure people feel safe.
All right. Switching to DC's Housing Authority, a recent report showed that there's a lot of issues and failures at the DC Housing Authority. Words like unsafe, unsanitary were used to describe some of the buildings that are maintained by and monitored by DC Housing Authority and units. And the question we heard, I should mention, we heard from the mayor who said she's embarrassed and is ordering a top-down review. But as a member of council, we've seen some legislation already introduced to try to address that. How would you tackle this issue if you were on the council?
I mean, I think it's interesting that the mayor says that she's embarrassed. We should be embarrassed. She should be embarrassed. This has been a terrible problem for a long time. The idea that a quarter of our public housing units are decrepit and unable to be used or not being used while we have a affordable housing crisis, just terrible. And this is not a thing that came up 1 week ago. The HUD report came out recently, but people have been aware of these problems, and the way in which DCHA is operated is a scandal, and we need to address it. I think it's great that the council got immediately on this with legislation to take the first kind of preliminary steps, but this is a thing that we all need to dig in really hard in the next council term, do serious oversight over DCHA, figure out how we can fix this issue, whether it's governance, whether it's investment, whether it's some other kind of approach. But my role will be oversight, and my role will be trying to broaden the discussion of how we can fix this question, because creating more affordable housing, we have affordable housing that is hiding in plain sight and not being taken advantage of. DCHA also operates the voucher program, and there are issues around the voucher program and how that operates. We need to get this right, and it will be a major project for me once I'm on the council to try to be a part of getting it right. In an odd way, the HUD report is a kind of gift, because it's raised the profile of issues that have been out there for a long time. And now everyone is compelled to try to address them and make this better.
Let's talk a bit about some of your strategies for affordable housing. Some of the conversation has been about, increasing affordable housing. We've heard ideas thrown about as in taking some of the commercial space that's vacant now and making that into, mixed properties. I mean, what are some of your ideas to tackle this affordable housing issue?
Yeah, so I mean, it's every tool in the toolbox. One of the things I support expanding rent control. That's one piece. Another is the talk about converting office buildings. We're in a whole new world. The post-pandemic world, the demand for office space is only going to go down, and we already were in a situation where we had office buildings that were partly empty, and we're going to have more of that. Now, it isn't easy and it can be expensive to convert those buildings to residential, but that's another piece of the puzzle to do that. In Ward 3, up and down the corridors, the Connecticut Avenue and Wisconsin Avenue corridors, there are planning processes for how we're going to develop those corridors and the transit hubs. And the proposals on the table are to increase density pretty significantly around those places. And if you do that, you can get a certain amount of affordable housing out of it through the inclusionary zoning programs. But it may be that we need to use incentives in places like Friendship Heights, Tenleytown, the Van Ness area to increase over what inclusionary zoning would provide. Lastly, I mean, not lastly, but lastly, so I don't go on forever on this answer, that we have public properties, and we can develop using the public land and have a higher percentage of affordable housing on those sites than we should. And so one of the things that people are talking about now is the Chevy Chase Civic Core, the library and rec center that'll be developed. There are other, and the focus is on affordable housing above it. There are other places like it. And then I guess a last is we need to look at targets of opportunity where the city can buy properties and then do RFPs to have developers come in and do a higher percentage of affordable housing than they would otherwise be required, to leverage city resources in order to get more built. So it's an every tool in the toolbox response to a real crisis.
All right, well, let's move to the migrant situation and the buses that we've seen come into town from southern states. They've arrived outside the White House, outside the vice president's mansion, Union Station, several other locations throughout the city. And it led to a response from the mayor of starting a migrant services outlet in the city government. And that was supported by the DC Council as well. Talk a bit about how, as a member of council, you would approach this situation, your reaction to it, and how you would approach it, and, I guess try to assist and help these people who have been brought in.
Yeah, so thanks for this question. I, the idea that these people would become political footballs in the way that they have been is really sad. But it's a reality. They're turning up in buses on our doorstep, and we need to do something about it. One of the things that I've already done is meet with the leaders of the sanctuary movement in the area, people who are greeting from the faith community, who are greeting the buses and are working on trying to help these people get get settled or get to where they can be comfortable, and supporting those efforts that grow out of the faith community, I think is a really important thing. I think it's very impressive what these people are doing. And it's interesting because the people who are coming, they may be surprised that they're coming here, but these are very motivated people. And once they get here, they really are looking for how do they make this work? Sometimes as I understand it, somebody will say, I have a cousin in Cincinnati, and the sanctuary folks will try to figure out how to get them to Cincinnati and they'll get settled there. Sometimes there are families and faith communities that are willing to take people in and help them get established. I think supporting those efforts is the key thing government can do. Not taking it over, but supporting it.
All right. Well, let's turn to the marijuana legislation and discussions over that, because we just saw President Biden put out those pardons for simple possession. But part of that whole announcement was also that he has ordered the Attorney General to review how it's scheduled and whether it should be a Schedule One drug anymore, up there with things like LSD and heroin. Well, if that were to change, then that could lead to more opportunity for council to take up legislation when it comes to the availability of marijuana, the sale of marijuana in the city. So where do you fall on that? And what type of legislation would you, if you wanted to introduce legislation, would you introduce?
But I think this is one that's really interesting because the legalization and regulation movement is happening in red states and blue states. I mean, it's the direction that the country is going, to decriminalize marijuana and regulate it. And I support that. Where we are right now is in this odd world where we have decriminalized it, but we aren't in a position where we can regulate the sale of it in a way that would be healthy and maximally safe for everyone. I would be looking for where the door opens so that we can do real regulation of that market and do it properly and get to where marijuana is legal in our community, but also regulated and subject to taxes.
All right. Well, a big topic always in DC for many years, DC statehood. Where do you fall on that, and where would you be in the push for it that many are behind?
Yeah, so I'm 110% for DC statehood. We need to become a state, and there's a lot of people who are um, skeptical, like it'll never happen. But actually, I think we could be pretty close. It's a question of, frankly, if Democrats can take control of the House and the Senate and the White House at the same time, then I think, and have a big enough cushion in the Senate to push it through. And I think that's achievable. Well, I don't know whether that'll be a thing that happens in these midterm elections or it's a thing that happens sometime later, but I think it's coming. And DC deserves to be a state. Other places that are smaller than us are states. Many places that pay fewer taxes than us are states. We deserve representation. There's no national capital anywhere else in the world where people don't have a vote in their national legislature in the way that we do. We need to get statehood. We need to put our shoulder down to do it. I will do whatever I can to be helpful on this, whether it's public education in the district. People have raised ideas. We have thousands of people who come here every year as visitors from other parts of the country, and they don't think about DC statehood. Well, we should do more to make sure that they see that this is an issue, that 700,000 people are disenfranchised. And they're a captive audience to us when they're here. Let's take advantage of that. Let's do creative things to raise the profile of statehood here when people are here, but also go out into around the country and promote statehood there. There's an idea of retrocession to Maryland. Frankly, my opponent has been an advocate for the idea of retrocession to Maryland. And we don't want to be a part of Maryland. Maryland doesn't want us. It's a cul-de-sac to avoid us getting two senators. And it's a cul-de-sac created by Republicans to keep us from getting two senators. And that's the wrong answer. The right answer is statehood. The right answer is for more people in the District of Columbia to put their shoulder down to try to make it happen.
All right. Well, I want to turn to term limits. We're one of the biggest cities in the nation, but many other big cities have term limits for elected officials. But DC does not. In 2001, it had it, and then that was done away with by lawmakers. Then, what are your thoughts on term limits? Obviously, there's the argument of institutional knowledge versus, having people only in there for a limited amount of time. Where do you stand on that topic when it comes to term limits?
So in principle, I think it should be up to voters about whether or not people can stay and how long they can stay. And we all get back in front of voters periodically, and I think they can decide. I'm trying to remember whether that term limits episode was one in which there was a referendum and the voters said to have term limits, and then the lawmakers overturned it. Is that one of those examples?
Yeah, I think it was, I honestly, it was in 2001. I think it was a referendum that led to that. Yeah.
So the idea of the council overturning referenda, I don't like that, because if my whole idea is, let's let the voters decide. If the voters had decided it, whether or not I favor term limits, if the voters had decided it, I think I would support it. In principle, I would not push for it. I think, and just using the example of Mary Chey here in Ward 3, she would not have had her. I don't know what the term limit would be, but Mary Chey has been a great servant to Ward 3, and it would have been a shame if she hadn't been able to continue doing the great work that she did.
All right. Well, talking about Mary Chey and her tenure as a Ward 3 council member, where would you compare to her? Where are you alike and where are you different?
So, I think that we're different people, and the way in which we approach problems, I think, is probably different. The place where we come out, I think, is often very similar. A big focus for me has been schools. Mary has been great on schools here in Ward 3. I'm focused on schools in Ward 3 and also across the city. And I think I'll bring that to the council in a way that's different from the way that Mary approached it. I do not want to diminish the work that she's done, because it is phenomenal what she was able to get done for Ward 3. Mary also has been a real leader on the environment. And I have not been active on environmental issues in quite the same way in the same way that Mary has. But I actually want to try to pick up her mantle and learn from what she has done and work with the people who she has worked with to try to continue to be a leader on environmental issues. But while I've been very, very active on schools issues, and in a different way than Mary, she's been very active on environmental issues in a different way than me, and I want to learn from that.
All right. And also, I just realized I misspoke about the term limit, so I still have you on.
Oh, okay.
Set it straight. As in 2001, it was repealed by the council, but in 1994, a referendum led to term limits. But now there's been a discussion too about a charter, the DC charter needing to be modified, and that would take council action to allow for another vote on term limits. So I guess that would be more of my question. I should ask you that too. Where would you stand on it if you get, pushed to change the charter?
Yeah, so this one now we're really into something that I haven't thought about. I think the idea of allowing people to vote on issues that they want to raise, I probably would be supportive of that. I wouldn't want to checkmate term limits and keep people from being able to express themselves on that issue if it was somehow a carve-out issue. But term limits has not been a torch that I've been carrying, and it's not a torch I would carry using the Mary Chey example again. I think every year that Mary served was valuable to Ward 3, and I wouldn't have wanted to lose any of them.
Well, thank you so much for taking time. I just wanted to clear that up, but thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Mike.
Or you got it, Matthew Frumin. He's the Democratic candidate for Ward 3's council seat. And thanks for watching.